Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is September 26th, and I'm just going to explain why the MGTOW philosophy has become much bigger in Chile compared to in Argentina. In previous videos, I discussed about my experience and time living in South America. I lived in both Chile and Argentina. I studied and worked in these two countries. That isn't to say, though, that I actually spent more time in Chile, and I understand Chile a little better, but I also do understand Argentina quite well. My brother actually lived in Argentina for about 4 years, so he knows Argentina really well. And I probably went there about 14 or 15 different times during the time I was living in South America. Argentina has a really cool and vibrant culture, as I've spoken about before. It's very Italian and Southern European tied. It's very fun type of culture. The Argentinians are very sensual kind of people. They really love to party, to eat and drink well, to enjoy time with family and friends, and just simply to make the most of life, even in bad economic situations, which is often this situation for many Argentines. Now in Chile, to an extent, it's the same thing. Chileans love to enjoy life, enjoy family and friends, to party, and just simply to make the most with what they have. But at the same time, I believe that the intimate relationships are a bit different, honestly, in each of these two countries. And it's really interesting the differences here. Now, one major thing about Chile, I think, is while it has a lot of the Southern European ties, at the same time, I think it has more association and connection with North America and Western Europe and even places like Australia, England. So I think the Anglosphere has a lot more influence in general in Chile than in Argentina. I think it's really noticeable, honestly, in the overall dating and relationship environment in Chile compared to Argentina. While dating environment and relationship situation's not perfect in Argentina, I would say overall the general satisfaction is higher for men in Argentina than in Chile. I don't see MGTOW as being as popular in Argentina like it is in Chile, especially on a percentage basis. Percentage-wise, I think it's much bigger, honestly, in Chile than in Argentina. Of course, there's different reasons or opinions on why this is, but one of the first reasons, I think, is that the dating scene in Argentina is such that the people are a little more focused on more trivial factors of relationships, perhaps. There's a lot of emphasis put on small nuances like on dancing, or on how well someone can entertain, or how well of a storyteller someone is. These are important facets of dating an Argentine. Whereas I think in Chile, while this has value, I don't think it's nearly as valuable. And I think the economic aspect is typically more emphasized and focused on for the domestic guys in that particular market. Also understand, Chile is a very, very high concentration of wealth at the top, while it has a very large lower class. And it's very much this pyramid situation. And so what this means is that the guys at the top have many, many choices, and whereas the guys at the bottom have few options, unfortunately. Whereas I think in Argentina, while guys at the top also have a huge assortment of options, it tends to not be as concentrated, and many guys, even at the bottom, will still be able to date or marry women that are also lower in status. This is one thing that you notice, especially in Argentina, when you go into the other cities, not just in Buenos Aires, the capital. When you go to cities like Rosario, Mendoza, San Carlos de Bariloche, in cities like this, a lot of these people have been associated, or mutual associations, for such a long time. Two people, men and women, may not be dating at that moment. It may happen 5 or even 10 years down the road. Eventually a relationship will spring up. It's kind of, in some ways, I think, how Italy perhaps was. Whereas in Chile, there's often these long-term associations among friends or family. I don't think it's as deeply embedded. And this is a key distinction here. Understand in Argentina that many of the people accept their economic situation and they kind of understand that they're never going to have a lot of resources, and for this reason they just embrace what they have. I think in Chile, due to the fact that it's a more capitalistic inspired government and country, there's naturally this inclination to want more economic freedom, to want more economic whatever it may be. And this is definitely so with the women. They really want to date or marry up and gain access to these resources. Whereas I think in Argentina, they know that it's not accessible. Argentina is a population of maybe around 50 million people. Most of these people know that it's not going to be a possibility. Even for the women, it's often not a practical situation. And so they just understand that rather than look so much at this part of life, they look more at other personal attributes of the person and how well they enjoy their company and how entertaining the person is and how they connect with their family and friends. These factors, I think, are much more at play than maybe the financial situation. Understand also that it's often the situation that in governments or in countries that have systems like what we in Argentina, for example, their country has always leaned more towards socialism/communism. They've always been more of this in this boat, the majority of the people. If we go back to like the 1950s, their country was actually a very high-ranked country in the world. Argentina was poised to become one of the dominant countries of the 21st century, in fact. Due to a lot of bad political decisions and outcomes in this country, the country just started to decline big time in the 1970s and until present. It never was able to get to the point that it was at in the 1950s. And much of this is tied to their socialist/communist tendencies. The people have tend more to prefer this. Whereas in Chile, for example, it's, as I stated before, for the past 30 years, they've been much more leaning towards capitalism and towards more economic liberties. This often, though, just reflected in the social environment and in the hypergamy and relationship environment for men and women. It's very much crosses over from the economics to the intimate relationships. What we can see is that the women definitely value the economics more of the men in places like Chile, as they see their government and the kind of direction the government takes. And likewise in Argentina, the government is seen as very socialist/communist leaning in Argentina. And so likewise, women don't value these things as much as men. They don't see maybe economics as a priority and as the main focus with relationships. So the whole concept of hypergamy kind of changes. And as I said before, when you have a large population that is mostly in the middle or lower middle class and then lower class, for most people, they're just going to accept average. They're going to be, women are going to be fine with average men or even below average men. Whereas if you go to a country where, especially in smaller countries like Chile, where there's a very concentrated amount of wealth at the top, naturally these smaller countries, you're going to have a lot of these women from all spectrums aiming for those guys at the top here, and rather than look at all their options around them. Another aspect I think that I see different in Argentina compared to Chile is I believe Argentine women in general are more flexible. They don't have as high of standards for the men. They tend to be a little more practical and realistic about what's achievable and what's not. I think in Chile often there's just a huge misunderstanding of what's practical and what isn't attainable. And so many women and girls in Argentina just they accept a certain level from a guy, whereas in Chile this level may be much higher because their standards are just really high. The other thing also understand is that Argentines are very attractive women. They have a very large population of attractive women, and as we can see in countries like Russia and Ukraine, and in countries that have bad economics, where there's a large percentage of very attractive women, these type of countries tend to offer very good dating markets for the men, whether it's domestic or international. And because they are competing against a lot of attractive women, naturally females have to lower their standards. And when you combine that with economics, they understand that they're not going to all be getting the very highest ranking guys to their country. They're really going to have to lower their standards even to get a pretty solid quality guy that has most of the traits that they want. And this is how it typically is in these type of countries. In Chile, there's a lower amount of physical beauty amongst the women. So the ones who are beautiful, they pretty much know that they can always get the very top tier of guys, because there's not as many beautiful women in Chile, and this is just a fact. I'm referring to physical beauty here, not internal beauty. Physical beauty. And physical beauty, contrary to what some people may say, is often the most looked at thing by a man. By most men, this is the area that they look at the most when they're looking at a woman. I'm not saying this is the only thing that men look at. I'm just saying this is often one of the highest things that a guy first looks at when they're looking at a woman. Of course, there's exceptions. There's guys maybe that don't value this as much, but that norm for a guy is like this. Media is another area that's a little different when we look at Argentina compared to Chile. The media influence is a bit different in Argentina. For example, in their country, national media has much more popularity than it does in Chile. And the national media is very in line with their government. It's very much a government type of affiliation. Outside of their domestic media, the media that's often looked at isn't just necessarily North America. It's from Europe. It's from even places like Russia and other South American countries. And this is really important to understand here. These kind of influences on the people tend to be less Western, whereas the media outlets like in Chile tend to be very like Western affiliated, along with mainstream ideals or alternative lifestyles. These kind of influence tend to be heavier in Chile from like Western countries such as North America and in Europe, Australia. And we could see this with MGTOWism. Why MGTOWism naturally, due to the fact that more Chileans, percentage-wise, are more connected with the Western media outlets, would have more understanding of this than guys in Argentina that probably aren't as connected with these Western media outlets. Of course, Argentinian people do connect with these outlets, these media outlets, but I'm talking about the masses here. The average person does not have a lot of asphyxiation to these kind of Western ideals. They tend to focus more within their domestic market, maybe in South America. And like I said, it's not just in Western Europe. They may also look at places like Russia or China for their influence, their ideals. And also remember here that Argentina has very good ties with countries like Russia and China. The relations with Chile and China are strong, but Chile and Russia not as strong here. I would say Chile has more stronger relations with North America, US, Canada, and places like England. MGTOWism takes more of a back seat in places like Argentina because of how media is consumed and the kinds of media that people typically consume. I've said this also, I think it's the same way in Russia and Ukraine. Due to the fact that in Russia, that Western media is not nearly as followed on a domestic level like in places like Germany or France or England. Naturally, these kind of ideals just don't permeate society as strong as they do in Western-like countries. And this is really key here to understand. And the last reason I think that Argentines just aren't as big into MGTOWism as Chile is just the fact that Argentinians are really emotional kind of people, and they just like to have a fun time. And often this can be irrational. Sometimes it's rational, but probably more often it's irrational. And so relationships often being very emotional based and very having an environment of fun, people just don't really think about long-term outcomes of these situations. They go on with life. If the relationship lasts, it lasts. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's kind of, I think, their perspective. They don't think about it long term in terms of like how they do in these Western countries. They just try to make the most of each day, live in the present, and see what happens. And this, I think, is a key reason why MGTOWism isn't as big. And the other thing, going back to what I mentioned, is many guys here know that they can find another girl. If something goes wrong, they can probably more easily find another girl or woman to replace their former girlfriend. Whereas I think in Chile, due to the gender situation, they're more likely to know that it's more difficult. So a guy's probably a little more careful in this respect. Whereas Argentina, they probably know they can replace that girlfriend a bit quicker. So that's kind of my understanding of these two countries. But I look forward to people's feedback below, and thank you.